Other colors.
Sweet.
Perfect.
They're going to call this meeting of the Credit Planning Commission to order with a roll call, please.
Peggy Smith.
Bob Ganusi.
Brian Cirkvenick.
Margaret Bowles. Katie Souls.
Andy Miller and Joy McCoy did let me know that she would not be able to make it tonight.
Okay.
So we have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You. And motion on the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of July 24th.
I move to approve the consent agenda. Second.
Favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with that. The open forum, in which your remarks to 3 minutes, and we'll be discussing the items of the agenda. So, open forum, so. Art?
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone. I just want to talk about, let's just say you needed to wash your clothes and you went to laundry, and the sign on the laundry said, we're going to turn your clothes around in 5 days. Right? And so I'm going to do business with those guys. They're going to turn this laundry around in 5 days. Sounds pretty reasonable. And you leave them your laundry and you come back 5 days later and your laundry's not done. Now you're out of underwear. Okay. Now what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And the business is hurt. The business that you're going to do business with is hurt because they don't have the revenues from washing your laundry. Right. So I'm making that analogy because I think it's something all of y'all can relate to. right? I mean, I think we can all relate to timeframes that people commit to. In 10W is what I'm actually here to comment on in my laundry analogy. Town Code Section 19-1-230 provides 5 days for the determination of completeness, in 5 days for submittal for referrals. Okay, now 10W is a plan that's already been approved by the town board and had some conditions. And it was submitted back to the town, and the completeness review was due on August 22nd. And we don't have a completeness review. Do we have a completeness review, Garrett?
No, we do
Thank you.
not.
This is due to go out to referrals under your town code, which I think all of the planning commission and the town board swore an oath to support the code, wants to support the code, and wants to see timeframes that you set forth for your staff and your people to meet be met. That's what I would hope anyway. So tomorrow, 8/29, that is due to go out to referral agencies. So Garrett, I would like to know, are you sending our 10W resubmittal out for referral tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So that's all.
Thank you. Anything else? Oh,
What I want to talk about is how the staff
just a quick
jacks.
name, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Purnell,
sorry,
yeah,
Purnell
yeah.
Quinn, resident of Fraser. I
Thank you.
forgot, used to be on the other side of the table. So when I was a trustee and a planning commissioner, I thought it was very unfair and very biased and kind of a steering when the staff would tell you if they wanted to approve or not approve a development or a project. The staff is hired to do their job, and their job is to give us the facts, not to give us their opinion. The board of trustees and the planning commission is supposed to be giving us their opinion based on what they think is best for the town. The employees don't live in the town. I don't think they should be giving an opinion about what's being developed or not being developed. We don't have a design review committee, so there shouldn't be any discussion of what a building looks like or doesn't look like, if people like it or don't like it. If the town of Fraser would like to have that, then they should start a review committee for design. We do not have one. That's all I wanted to mention tonight.
Thank you. Anything else open forum? Anybody online?
If anybody online would like to speak in open forum, please raise your hand. Do not see any hands, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll move on to actually, item 5 is actually a discussion, OVR 5, not really possible action. It's a review. So we'll go over the documents with Garrett and take a look at this.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I'll just get my presentation going here. So the item up for discussion this evening is a sketch plan for the OVR 5 parcel, formerly known as the Summerall parcel. And I just want to first start by talking about sketch plans, what their purpose are, and how they're defined in our code. So this section here, 19-3-220, speaks to sketch plans. Their intent is, in this language is straight from the code, essentially, provide the town the opportunity to describe the town's vision to the applicant for a particular property, as well as give the applicant an opportunity to discuss plans for the development of the site, explain how the plans will further the town's vision, as well as obtain input and direction from town staff early on in the development process. So item D2 in this section of the code states that the applicant or town staff may opt to present the sketch plan to the Planning Commission for preliminary feedback. This provision has existed in the town's land development code at least since 2018, when that comprehensive overhaul rewrite of the code occurred. And likely before that, but I didn't, check back at our old code pre-2018. However, I will say, since that time, no sketch plans have been presented to the Planning Commission from 2018 to today. And there certainly have been sketch plans submitted during that time. And I broadly just believe that practice of not generally presenting them to the planning commission is really to the detriment of both the applicant and the commission. I've mentioned to some of you, I forget if I mentioned this in a previous planning commission meeting, but last August, a sketch plan for the village at Grand Park, planning areas 1WA and 2W was submitted to the town. The town reviewed that and provided comments back in early October. And that sketch plan was never showed to the planning commission. And I think, again, in hindsight and given the discussion, a lot of our discussions this year have centered around that development. It certainly would have been helpful to present that sketch plan. So I think just broadly speaking, moving forward, it's likely going to be my preference to share and show these sketch plans to you all. And even for this property specifically, a sketch plan was submitted to the town in September of last year, kind of accompanying the 55-foot height variance application that was ultimately denied by the Board of Adjustment last September. But again, that sketch plan wasn't presented to the Planning Commission. It wasn't even included in the packet for the Board of Adjustment, which again, I think that was kind of a real shortcoming. So, these sketch plans are just meant to facilitate discussion, provide feedback to the applicant, and make sure everyone's on the same page. So with that, I will dive into what is being proposed in this sketch plan. The applicant and property owner is Grand Park Development LLC. This is the 5-acre parcel that is bounded by Elk Creek condos to the north, Old Victory Road, the Meadows at Grand Park, and Cousins Meadow open space to the east, Cousins Point to the south, and Elk Creek at Grand Park to the west. What's proposed on this sketch plan is 100 residential condo units. And this parcel is in the business zone in the town of Fraser. So I think we're all kind of familiar with this parcel, but here's an overview of the location of the development or the property. Again, surrounded by, existing portions of Grand Park that are largely built out as it stands today. Here's a look at the zoning map for the area. Again, this parcel is zoned business while everything around it is zoned PD or planned development, all being part of Grand Park. One thing that I do want to note is that the current zoning on this property has existed since at least 2010, if not earlier. So I checked, our comprehensive plan from 2010 has a zoning map that dates from that time, and this parcel was clearly zoned business. So even though it's remained largely undeveloped. I know there's an existing home and, barn structure on the property, but certainly not developed to its highest potential, right, given the zone. And it's been that way for quite a while, but it's been zone business for, again, at least 14 years, if not longer. Say that again, sorry.
I think it's longer. There was a business in there for a number of years.
Gotcha. Thank you. Here's a look at the existing conditions of the site. Again, largely undeveloped, although there's an existing home, barn, and shed. And I mean, the key thing with this is the topography on the site. Going from left to right is going from south to north. And, over this site, there's a pretty substantial change in grade or in elevations. It's nearly 50 feet from the highest point up near Cousins Point. Down to the lowest point near Elk Creek condos and Elk Creek itself. So certainly a large change of grade on the site. Just for reference, this is an image of what was shown on the sketch plan from last year that accompanied the 55-foot height variance application. And largely, these building footprints more or less match exactly the Elk Creek condo style buildings. However, it was proposed that these would be 4-story buildings instead of 3-story buildings. One thing that I'd also note is on this sketch plan from a year ago, there was no proposed topography shown, right? So it's really hard to judge what is being proposed in terms of how to regrade this site, the actual orientations of these buildings, what elevation they would sit at, and so on. So here's a look at the current sketch plan that was submitted a few months ago. This sketch plan shows 100 residential units, which is hitting, the maximum 20 unit per acre density. In compared to the sketch plan from a year ago, the open space that's provided on this sketch plan is roughly the same, around 45%. That's 10% more than is required per the business zone. But one other comparison from this sketch plan to the previous one is that the building footprints are larger, and the area taken up by, surface parking and drive areas is smaller. And primarily the reason for that is, as you can see, 5 of these 6 buildings are proposed to have effectively underground parking, a level of parking beneath the first occupied floor of the structure. Another thing that's clearly shown on this sketch plan is the proposed grading and topography for the site, and certainly helps to communicate the challenges that exist with developing this site and the grading there. Also with this sketch plan, the buildings are proposed to be 49.5 feet from the finished grade to the top of the roof, as compared to 55 feet on the previous sketch plan. Okay, so now I just want to talk through some of the comments that staff provided on this sketch plan application. The first has to do with how height is being measured on this sketch plan. So on the sketch plan that's submitted, height is being measured from the finished grade of the building. This is, in alignment with how building height is measured in Rendezvous and Grand Park per the 2003 annexation agreement. So this is section 2.1.8. And again, just to highlight, height is measured from the average finished grade of the structure, essentially. Now, this site is not in a PD district. It's in a standard town of Fraser zone, the business zone. Therefore, we have to use the definition of building height as stated in the municipal code, which I've copied here. So the thing to highlight is that there are 3 methods, and whichever yields a greater height is the one that should be used. And the real key one here is the very first option, which is utilizing the point of the lowest pre-construction elevation on any building face. So why does our code say this? I would argue that the intent of this is that, just to imagine you have a site and you put, let's say 5 feet of fill, and then you put the building on top of that. This is essentially saying that, that 5 feet of fill that you add to the site, you have to account for that when you measure the height, because any building sitting on top of that, is now 5 feet higher than whatever the existing ground was. And therefore, the kind of impacts to views and creating shadows and things like that are effectively the height of that building plus that 5 feet of fill. So that's kind of the logic behind this. Again, I will note that utilizing this on a site with this type of grading change does result in some clear challenges. One other thing that I'd like to know, the sketch plan shows measuring height to the very top of the roof. And our code allows for when you have a pitched or, gabled roof that you measure height to the midpoint. I know this is something that I've reiterated to the Planning Commission a few times, but that's another thing to note. All the measured heights on this sketch plan are to the top of the roof, and the height measurements that I provide in the comment letter are also measured to the top of the roof, but in reality, that measurement should be to the midpoint. So you can really shave off a few feet from these heights, actually. So diving into, what the measured height of these buildings on the sketch plan should be per town code. Looking at the lowest pre-construction elevations. So what's shown in red is, the outlines of the building footprints, but just overlaying on that existing topography of the site. And for each building, I've identified where that lowest point of pre-construction elevation is. And, generally speaking, that lowest point is quite a bit lower than the proposed finished floor elevation for each of these buildings, which is where height is currently being measured. So just for example, building A, the lowest point of existing elevation is 17 feet lower than the finished floor elevation of that building, as shown on the sketch plan.
That's confusing. One more time.
So maybe it would help if I pull up the sketch plan itself and we look at the elevations.
I'm easily confused on stuff. like
No,
that.
no, you're good. It is a little complex. So let me just transition here.
And I'm guessing that has to do with it being recessed down on the hillside.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this might be a better way to communicate it. This is from sheet 7 of the sketch plan. And this is a profile or side view of these buildings. The thick black line is the proposed grade of the site. This red line here is where the lowest existing point of the ground is, where this building lies. So
Current conditions.
current conditions is what's shown in red. Proposed grade is what's shown as the thick black line, and the building itself sits on top of that.
So that's where it adds that 5 feet or something.
Exactly. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so on the sketch plan, it's showing a height of 49.5 from proposed grade to top of roof. But really what the measured height should be is from the lowest point of pre-construction elevation, which in this case is just 5 feet below building D. There are some more kind of maybe significant differences in the case of like building A, for example. The lowest point of pre-construction elevation is a good 17 feet below the proposed finish grade. So that's the difference between this red line and that thick black line.
So that's all gonna be fill?
I think, well, yes and no. I guess the caveat to that is, again, 5 of these 6 buildings were proposed to have underground parking. So again, in the case of building A, this blue line here is showing what the bottom of that garage parking area would be. I think generally speaking, it's 12 feet below the finished grade of the first floor. So that's shown by the blue line here.
Okay.
So
Isn't there a lot of wetlands over there? I mean, parking
Some of them.
garages and wetlands don't.
It's higher than.
It's higher, yeah, but.
yeah, I would generally say, wetlands aren't shown anywhere on this sketch plan. That's not a requirement. I would imagine that any wetlands that do exist are likely in closer proximity to Elk Creek. It may be that there are some on the site, but it's not really determined at this time.
Cause you're crossing a floodplain to get into that site. I mean.
That is true, but
It just, yeah.
if
we're
you
go-
go out on the side, it's a huge slope coming down, so. Where the buildings are situated, I'm sure there's no wetlands up that high, but down near Elk Creek, you would possibly find some. So.
Right.
Crossing that road, crossing the creek is gonna have to be engineered and looked at, and Corps of Engineers is probably gonna have to weigh in on it.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. And that was kind of the intent of this comment here, just simply to state that, if this access road were to be built as constructed, it does cross an identified FEMA 100-year floodplain. It is highly likely that there are wetlands in this area. So certainly some FEMA and Army Corps approval or coordination. I'll just get back to the presentation here.
As you're moving back to your presentation.
Mhm.
Would you go over once more, when you can use the average of the 4 corners versus when you can, or when you must use the lowest pre-construction elevation? Because that's a little confusing to me.
Sure. So any property that is governed by the 2003 annexation agreement, so anything in Rendezvous or Grand Park, can use the average finish grade. That's a specific definition of height in the annexation agreement.
It's the annexation agreement. It's not the code.
Average four corners, it's not average. Average four. There's a big difference.
Well, it says the average finish
The
grade of the primary four corners. So yes, I could be more specific there.
Right. Okay,
That's
the average,
Side of the mountains that homes are on and West Mountain. No different than this.
okay,
Yeah, it's basically to deal with the contours and the slopes.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good clarification. When you have, say, a split level building that's, it has two or more finished grades, because it's kind of a split level type of structure or like a walkout basement type of situation, then it's the average finished grade. So maybe one part of the structure could be, 40 feet high and the other be 30 or something like that. But it averages out to 35. Does that kind of make sense?
This is not governed by the annexation agreement, though. This is governed by town code.
Correct. You're correct.
Well, I mean, this text here is from the
I
annexation
know, but
agreement,
This
but
project is not.
oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that's correct. Yeah.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, this site is governed by this height definition. And I would say that item C here, or even B, are somewhat similar to the definition of height in the 2003 annexation agreement. But I think, again, the key thing here is that you have to use whichever of these three options yields the greatest height.
how do you take into consideration a garage underneath the building? Because I think the way it's stated is that you're talking about building a building on a site with the finished floor elevation being the ground level. In this case, the finished floor elevation of where the first housing units are going to be, or condos are going to be, is 12 feet higher than the garage floor level. So how do you take into account that in terms of this definition?
According to the code, it's the pre-existing condition, so.
Yeah, so I guess the underground parking should not necessarily be a factor in the measurement of the height. It's, in this case, it would all be any portion of the underground garage, any of those walls or foundations don't appear to be exposed per this sketch plan. I will say there are some large retaining walls, particularly for the buildings A, B, and C that are on the western side of the property. Those retaining walls could potentially count as option C here, an exposed foundation or wall. But I think generally speaking, the bottom of those retaining walls are fairly close to the lowest point of pre-construction elevation. So, if we were to measure from the bottom of those retaining walls, I think it would be a similar height measurement to using the pre-construction elevation. Does that make sense? But again, I'm not 100% certain that it would be the correct or proper thing to do to measure from those retaining walls, which is why I've kind of just have at this point said, well, looking at the pre-construction elevation, the height is clearly this. And I'll speak to those retaining walls later in the presentation.
I think the intent of this code is that when you buy property next to a vacant parcel, you can predict from zoning what the height of that building is going to be. A project can't come in and build a big hill and put a building on top of it and call it good, because you bought the property next door, understanding that the max height would be 45 feet or whatever the code is above what's there now. So I think it's all of zoning is, I think, to help us predict as neighbors what's going to happen next door, what the constraints are going to be. So that to me is the intent of that language.
I agree. So again, the point of this slide was just to show that in general, that pre-construction elevation where these buildings are located is anywhere from 5 to 17 feet below the finished floor elevation of the first floor of these buildings. Now, something that's also just relevant for discussion, not for, measuring the height of these buildings, but again, just to speak to the topography of this site, is the highest point of elevation where these buildings are located. And in general, it's at or just above where the finished floor elevation of each building is, with a couple exceptions. But just going through them, like building A, the highest point of pre-construction elevation is 2 feet above where the first floor of the condo building is. For building B, it's just 1 foot above. For building C, they're exactly the same. So, so what that also means is that there's a big elevation differential across each of these building footprints, ranging from, as much as 19 feet for building A to as little as 5 feet for building E. And then just to kind of visualize this all in a side profile view and looking at building B as an example. Again, the lowest point of pre-construction elevation here is 14 feet beneath the first floor elevation. So that means that really the measured height, again, this is to the top of the roof, not the midpoint, but that measured height is 63.5, not 49.5. The garage is, located just above the existing low point, and the existing high point is roughly where the first floor of the condo building is located. So something that is also maybe helpful to visualize, and again, to the applicant's credit, the sketch plan really contains a lot of great information. I think one other thing that would have been helpful is something like an existing grade line on these profile views. And this dashed orange line here, I mean, is certainly a rough approximation, but recognizing that this building footprint sits on, the existing ground goes from that green line to that red line, the high point to the low point. The side of this building that we're looking at, certainly the existing topography doesn't follow that dashed orange line exactly, but it's probably something close to that, some sort of slope down, right? And what I would say is that, when you have this type of topography, a building footprint, when it's this big, the design of the building should probably be some sort of like terraced or split level building, right? To help follow that existing grade line as much as possible. I recognize, with this sketch plan proposal, with the proposal to have underground parking, that's either very difficult or just frankly impossible to accommodate that underground parking with a terraced or split level building. I mean, I think there's ways to be creative, but I mean, generally it's just much harder than if everything's at the same elevation.
So within code, you could go up to 45 feet on the high side and then drop it down.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah, so I'll just back up to our height definition. So kind of in the middle there, it says the height of a stepped or terraced building is the maximum height of any segment of the building. How I read that is exactly how you stated it. Like if you have, you would utilize kind of the lowest pre-construction elevation for that portion of the building. And if it's stepping down, you just, again, step down on the existing elevations. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to speak to is the administrative height variance that was also submitted with the sketch plan. So section 19-1-350 allows for town staff to act upon variance requests that do not exceed 10% of any minimum or maximum zoning standard. So in this case, the variance request is for a maximum height of 49.5 feet, which is a 10% increase to the maximum height of 45 feet. Our code further states that, in reviewing and processing an administrative height variance, town staff must apply the same review criteria, these 7 items here, as would the Board of Adjustment, right? So, again, even though it's not going before the Board of Adjustment, town staff has to evaluate against the same criteria. And, in my opinion, I know with the 55-foot height variance that was submitted for this site a year ago, it was denied, and I think correctly. But in evaluating these criteria with the current proposal, I think criterias 1, 2, and 3 are pretty clearly met for this site. The topography of the site is a unique physical circumstance that is, I would say, peculiar to this property. It doesn't exist throughout the neighborhood or district in which the property is located, and that topography was not created by the applicant, certainly. But again, to approve a variance, all of these criteria must be met, right? So the more challenging ones are certainly criteria 4 and 5. One thing I will say is that, the applicant understandably is trying to maximize their density on their site, trying to hit that 20 units per acre as closely as possible, as is their right to do so by code. I will say though that, an inability to hit that 20 unit per acre density does not mean that the property cannot be reasonably developed in conformity with the land development code. So that's criteria 4, right? And then criteria 5 speaks to if the variance is granted, it won't alter, the character of the neighborhood or substantially impair the appropriate use of adjacent property. So this is certainly kind of a touchy subject. I will say, views are not like, views through an adjacent property are not, some other property owner's right, and again, this property has been zoned business, 45 feet height for at least 14 years, if not longer. And I think the impacts of a 49 and a half feet tall building versus 45 feet, those impacts to views and, impairing the appropriate use to adjacent property is frankly quite minimal. But I just want to reiterate what these buildings are not 49 and a half feet. So that's ultimately why this variance at this time has neither been approved nor denied. It's really because what's being proposed is not a 49 and a half foot tall building. It ranged from, again, 54 and a half to I think like 63 and a half. Again, to the top of the roof, not to the midpoint, so shave a few feet off. And also with respect to criteria number 5, I do just want to speak to some of the impacts that these buildings as proposed would have on adjacent properties. Again, as part of the applicant sketch plan, the kind of profile view of these buildings against the buildings up on Cousins Point was certainly appreciated and kind of helped communicate the stair step intent that they're trying to achieve. However, they didn't show, the Elk Creek condo buildings to the north of the property. And what these purple lines show are the approximate, finish grade of the first floor as well as the top of the roof for the southernmost Elk Creek condo buildings, for example, building A. And recognizing that, I've placed those lines right up against this proposed building F from this sketch plan. And certainly these buildings would not be right up against each other. There's a couple 100 feet or so separating them, but just kind of to show the stair step between this site and Elk Creek condos is more significant certainly than kind of the stair step between Cousins Point and this site. Does that make sense?
Wait, this is more significant?
Yeah, so let me just maybe
I'm curious about Cousins Point.
yeah.
'Cause I think this stair step would be good.
I didn't understand what he was saying.
Okay.
I think I had it backwards.
No, you're good. So here's the sketch plan with my markup shown, and what's shown on this profile view, here are the existing Cousins Point buildings. Again, kind of stair stepping down themselves, going, this is view A. So again, going from south to north, it's these three buildings here. And then following along to where the proposed buildings are, you know, building D sits a bit higher than this one. Building A is a little bit lower. But generally speaking, it's stair stepping down. You can see D to E it goes down, E to F it goes down. The intent in speaking to Elk Creek condos is that the step down between, say, building F and Elk Creek condos building A, which is right here, is a bit more significant. And again, there's, you know, a fairly large retaining wall between them. And so that's simply the point I'm trying to make here.
Not reflected there is the view from Elk Creek side, which is one more level of building on those particular Cousins Point condo units. Because you actually have to walk downstairs to go into them. In other words, that's a view from the highway side, the meadow side,
Right.
Old Victory Road side. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yes.
In fact, those Cousins Point condo buildings aren't nearly as tall as these buildings.
From the Elk Ranch
From the
Road
side
side.
that has the,
Yep, got it.
they stair step those buildings down that slope.
Right.
It was complicated and.
Ask a question real quick.
Yeah.
Can you give an administrative variance if the height is actually proposed to be 65? I mean, do you have that capacity?
Can't
No.
vary by more than 10%.
Right, so
Right.
I guess the question is, what, with this, does it not then need to go to the Board of Adjustment? How does,
Depends on how we deem the height of the building.
Right. So if, again, the height of these buildings as measured per our code is not 49.5 feet. So the variance request does not match the proposal. I mean, technically, if, you know, if this were to be approved, like in a site plan, then it would need to go to the Board of Adjustment for approval of these heights. That's probably the simplest way to say it. Yeah.
so this is just discussion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Just to kind of show, oh, go ahead.
I have a question, and I understand what the code says, and I understand how you measure different ways of determining what the height is. But do we have any precedent for how a site like this gets graded? Because really what you're trying to do is you're trying to balance cut and fill.
Right.
Okay, so you're cutting into the slope on the high side, you're filling on the low side. So if you look at the graded site, then and measuring as if the graded site were the original grade, he's probably within his limits to build height wise. But if you go by the existing grade before grading, for a residential home, that wouldn't be much. I mean, it wouldn't be much of a difference, but for a building footprint the size of these buildings on the slope that we have there or the terrain that we have there, I mean, it seems like, you know, this is kind of an extraordinary condition, and some consideration should be given to how it gets graded and what it's going to look like graded, not what it looks like in pre-existing condition.
Again, it's predictability too, though, Bob. I
I'm
mean,
sorry, what?
it's predictability, you know. It's how does a neighbor, when they buy their property, understand what's gonna be there?
Well,
So the.
Okay, well, I understand your
And we do have quite a track record up in Ptarmigan. There's an awful lot of multifamily built into hillsides up there, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andy,
What have we done in the past?
Clark, let us finish our staff review and then we'll get into
So
your.
so what have we
input.
done in the past where we've had a site that is severely sloping and.
I would assume we lived with this code, so. it was-
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
let's finish the staff review if we could.
Yeah. I think just to close the loop on that, I mean, I understand the point you're making, Commissioner Ganusi, but again, just speaking back to the impact of adding that fill and then putting the building on top of that, you have to account for kind of the entirety of that elevation in terms of, you know, impacts to adjacent properties and measuring the height. And that's why I believe our code is written that way. And I think certainly the proposed grading is to have as little, I would assume, export of fill out of the site, because you know, to grade it any lower to the existing grade, I would assume they would have to export fill offsite, which I understand is expensive, and it just makes more sense to try to balance.
And it's to enable parking, underground parking, which is a good thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an amenity up here for sure.
Yeah.
well, and it also, it was done with the intent, I believe, to create the stair-stepped, you know, view that you mentioned before, so. This is a tough site.
But I mean, I do think Cousins Point is a good example of that type of building style, where the first floor is level with Cousins Circle, and then there's a walkout basement beneath it, kind of as the hillside slopes down. Just last thing I'll talk about with impacts to adjacent properties. These buildings kind of, you know, facing towards the west, towards Elk Creek. These all have fairly high retaining walls. So again, just speaking to the impact of, you have a 12-foot high retaining wall, and then you have a 49.5-foot from finished floor to top of roof building on top of that. Again, that's certainly different than if that retaining wall wasn't there and you had some sort of terrace building at 45 feet or 49.5 feet. So a couple things for the Planning Commission to consider, and kind of the intent of having this discussion. You know, I think certainly in conversation with the applicant, I think they are likely to revisit this sketch plan to some degree, certainly. But there, you know, there could be some consideration for a future variance request. And either of these would have to go before the Board of Adjustment, which is why it's good to talk about them now, in my opinion, to gauge, you know, the level of kind of feasibility or agreeableness to either of these types of variance requests. So one type of request would be to utilize the definition of height from the annexation agreement as opposed to the definition of height in town code. So the logic behind that is, again, yes, this is in a town of Fraser zone. It's not in a PD district, but it's surrounded by properties that are. It's completely surrounded by Grand Park. So I think there could be some logic to utilizing this definition of height. Another thing is, there's a section of our code which I copy on the next slide in full, and we can talk about, but it's an allowance in our code that allows for flexibility of building heights in a PD district. And again, there could be a variance request that seeks to utilize that section of our code, again, with the logic being that although it's not zoned as a PD district, but it's surrounded by properties that are, could there be consideration to utilize that section of our code? A couple other things to consider or think about is modifying the maximum height and density allowed in the business zone to be kind of closer aligned. What do I mean by that? So generally speaking, a 45-foot tall building is likely going to be 3 stories. So for a 4-story building to be 45 feet tall, the interior floor to ceiling heights are, they're essentially going to be shorter than what's generally desirable. And in a 3-story building, it's generally a challenge to try and accommodate, a 20 unit per acre density in that 3-story building. So just a couple of reference points. Elk Creek condos, again, just to the north of the site, those are all 3-story buildings. but the average density is around 14 units per acre. Granted, there's probably more open space provided than is required per, the PDD for that planning area. But that just kind of shows you, again, that kind of 3-story, maybe similar condo building, similar unit sizes. That's a 14 unit per acre density. So trying to achieve a similar building type, but at a higher density on this site almost certainly requires that 4th floor. Does that make sense? Another just point of comparison, Kozlogon, Maine, kind of a more unique situation given that it's a mixed use site. It does have 20 units on a roughly 0.6 acre site. So it's greater than 20 units per acre. Those are 3-story buildings, but those are smaller unit sizes, likely lower floor to ceiling heights. I think they're roughly 8 feet or 8.5. And not all of their parking is within that 0.6 acres. Again, as is allowed by code, some of their required parking is parallel parking on adjacent streets. So again, trying to accommodate all that parking on site that eats up space, it lowers density. And then the last thing is just, potentially revisiting our discussion from about a year ago regarding some sort of height bonus provision. I know we haven't discussed that since then. We've had, more pertinent things to discuss certainly, but just if there's any openness to having some sort of height bonus program that applies to the business zone more broadly, which would certainly include this site, that's certainly something that we can discuss and revisit. So in closing, this is that section of the code that I reference that speaks to the flexibility of building heights in PD districts. Essentially, even though there's a maximum allowed height in every planning area, it says the final height of those buildings may be negotiated by the Planning Commission when an FPDP is submitted, and also subject to further negotiation and or the approval of the board. And the negotiation should be carried out in relation to these 10 items. So just for reference, this section is what was used to allow on the northernmost of the 2 Market Street buildings, there's a 75-foot tall, like, architectural tower right on the corner of Grand Park Drive and Highway 40. Typically, our code would allow for, an appurtenance like a architectural tower or a spire like that, just 10 feet above the maximum allowed height, which for that area is 55 feet. But the Planning Commission allowed that tower to go up to 75 feet, basically citing this code, if that makes sense. So kind of a different situation. Again, I think I'm not aware right now of any other situations where this section of the code was utilized. The applicant likely knows and could point us in the direction of that, but this was one example that I do know of. But it was utilized for an appurtenance to the building, kind of an unoccupied architectural feature, right? Just meant to kind of enhance the aesthetics of the building and not provide any additional occupied floor space. So that's maybe slightly different than this example where really the ultimate goal is to achieve, I would assume, that 4-story height. So with that just concludes my presentation.
So you had a couple things though, Garrett, on parking, I believe.
Yeah, so those are really the main highlights of the comments that I provided to the applicant. Some more minor things just had to deal with snow storage. It appeared that the areas identified for snow storage weren't equal to the one third of the areas to be cleared. That's not, in my opinion, a huge issue. I think additional snow storage areas could be identified. On the sheet with the parking calculations, one of the tables just incorrectly listed a unit count. I think all the parking calculations were correct from my recollection. It was just that was more of a typographical error. So
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for staff before we move to the applicant? Okay, Clark?
Yeah, hi, everyone. So to start, we could have had this conversation 45 days ago, because that's when this staff review is due under your code. Not to get back into laundries and time, but it matters, right? 45 days in this environment is the equivalent of 90 because of our short construction seasons in winter. And time's money, right? And so I think this is a discussion, so I want to have a discussion with you all. And I want to hear your input. I'd first like to have Andy, the question I was going to ask you is, how do you square your position for protecting neighbors and, heights were already designated on this property. By the way, in 1998, I think this was annexed to the town with the B zone district. But how do you square your position with Victoria Village? That height was changed to 55 feet, right next to a bunch of existing residences. So how do you square that position, Andy, with that? That just happened recently. That's pretty near term.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's kind of precedent. Katie, you were involved in that. I remember your comments on that.
Sure.
So, I mean, how do you square that?
Well, there was a tremendous amount of credit given to that project because it's price controlled. I don't believe we see any price
Yeah.
control here, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
So,
That's
so
one of the
that would
good
be
things.
one of the considerations that you two would put into, it could be taller and have a bigger impact on the neighbors if it was price controlled?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I want to
Deed-
understand
Yeah,
how
if
you
it's deed
square certain
restricted,
things and
there's
have the
deed
community.
restrictions for
Okay.
housing, keeping it more affordable.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. I can't hear you.
Training on Highway 40 is about 6 feet.
Right,
But
correct.
there's no neighbors
you-
on Highway 40, Michael.
But the predictability.
The
from
neighbors
the
are next
neighbors
door
is-
on
yeah.
the single access that's going to be accessing the property. I mean, I
No,
got the
get
answer
your-
I wanted. I
get your
understand.
point,
I
Clark,
just
yeah.
wanted to understand that you knew that that had happened
Mhm.
recently next to existing neighbors. And I wanted to understand how you two squared that. You
So-
answered the question.
Okay. Thank
So,
Okay.
so next thing, first of all, Garrett, the owner's wrong. The property's owned and maybe the application was wrong. The property owner is OVR5 LLC. It's not Grand Park Development, and perhaps my team has the applicant wrong, but I just want to clarify that for the record.
Okay.
I appreciate
Okay.
that. Thank you.
And this is just a discussion, guys. So, what I really think that we're here to talk about is design and design quality. And we bought this property. We took assignment of a contract for this property. Okay. I didn't really want to buy the property. I wanted it cleaned up forever because it was kind of a junkyard. Still didn't look great. I'd like it to look better than it does, but it's, it is better now. We did haul a lot of junk off, a lot. But I took assignment of the contract from another group that was looking to buy it, and they were going to do modular. And I met with them, and they showed me their plan, and my general comment was, guys, I'm going to oppose that. And I think the 4 neighborhoods around it, Elk Creek Condos, Cousins Meadow being one of the most expensive, nicest in that area, Cousins Point, and the Elk Creek neighborhood, I can pretty much assure you they're not going to look kindly on modular. Just these were individual, not, modular has its place. This wasn't the place. And we ended up buying the property from Mr. Summerall. You guys all know Steve. Long story short, it was with the goal of building something that fits in the dead center of 4 neighborhoods. We worked around this project. We worked around this property and the eyesore that was, and it had a lot of impacts on all of our developments for years, right? And so now it's kind of the opportunity to, okay, let's right the ship and clean this mess up so it's not the dead center of 4 what are really great neighborhoods. And that's what we set out to do. I would put it to you all, since this is a discussion, my companies are open to any suggestions on what you do with a hill that's literally, it's a crown doing this and sloping up, right? And you can see what Cousins Point did to get into their entry. There's retaining walls all over the place because they had to cut in a road to get access to the point, that Cousins Point. So that being said, I'm not married to these buildings. We were trying to, yes, get to the density because we did pay quite a premium for the property and have a lot of infrastructure that it's going to require. And it's got a pencil. It is B zone, which is interesting to me. And I'd like to hear from the planning commission. I mean, do you think it should be mixed use? What, if you think there's an appropriate business there, what would it be? And where would it be? Right? I mean, I brainstormed, I can sit here, I brainstormed 3 different plans I think we've shown the staff. And I have pretty good planners. I'm the one that suggested hey, let's maybe do something a little different than the Elk Creek condos and put parking under. And then that eliminated all the separate garages, for the protected, so it's fewer buildings. And it actually, while they're bigger building footprints, Garrett understands this, he's a civil engineer. We got to have drive aisles under the parking or in the parking garage to get to the parking spaces. So those footprints have to be larger than Elk Creek that doesn't have buildings underneath, right? Which was the first drawing that he showed. So there's a lot of ways that this could be designed. And what I'd like to hear, you guys are sitting on the outside of our company, I'd like to hear what your opinions are on plans that we've submitted. And, can we stay in 45 feet? Sure. Different product, probably not very receptive to the market because you're going to have shorter and do 4 levels because you're going to have shorter ceilings. The Elk Creek condos have done very well because they're all 10-foot ceilings. Cool roof lines. We're trying to stay away from flat roof and not go modern. I mean, we could do a Miami modern right in the dead center of 4 very traditional neighborhoods. I think that might look a little bit odd. Personally, I mean, I think that could be kind of strange. Yeah, so I think we're open to designs. I'd start off with saying, did you guys like the first plan that Garrett had up here better than the plan that we're talking about tonight? And with all, I don't really care or how he got to the grades of existing grade. I'm not sure I totally agree with his red lines because that wasn't provided by our company. But what we are trying to do is work in the context of the topographies there and be sensitive to neighborhoods on either side and still provide them some light of day. Either, one being on kind of the northwest and one being on the southeast, as opposed to, one idea was a shotgun style stair step building straight up both sides with parking in the middle. And that works all day long in terms of the site. Question is that really good design? And, I lived in this neighborhood in the Cousins Meadow neighborhood 13 years and pretty proud of that neighborhood. And I'm sensitive. I have a lot of friends in that neighborhood. And so I'm sensitive to this being good design. And these are bigger footprint buildings than the Elk Creek ones. The first idea was let's just extend Elk Creek condos straight up the hill. Those are great looking buildings. It's a great project. That's the first image we showed or that he showed. And we can go back to that. And if y'all say, Clark, we like that. But those are, mind you, 4-level buildings. Okay. No parking underneath, but 4-level buildings. And I suspect if we go through the same approach that Garrett just explained to you all, we've probably come to the same conclusion. Right. So those buildings were 16-unit buildings, right? Instead of 12. They'd be elevator served, and then you end up with the garage buildings around. So, I mean, we could do Winter Park Lodge too. You guys all know Winter Park Lodge too, right? Winter Park Lodge too, Peggy? I can see it from my house pretty good. It's got to be like 300 doors of lights. That is the kind of road type building that you could do on this property, and it's conducive to it. I mean, it lends itself to that type of development. The road, and if the planning commission thinks that's appropriate, tell me. Say, yeah, we like that. I mean, I'm inviting you all to suggest to us, what do you guys think would work on this complicated piece of property that's surrounded by 4 neighborhoods that I built? right? What do you think? What do you think works? Andy, you're a good builder. What do you think works here? What would you do?
Not sure, Clark.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we'll get some opinions.
Well, I'm asking you guys.
Yeah,
I'm open
appreciate
to
it.
ideas.
I appreciate it.
Are you ready for opinions and questions or?
Well, hang on just a second. Just a couple of other things that I want
Me,
to
I guess.
talk about. And
Clark, can we talk design a little bit or?
yeah, no, sure. I've just, yeah, and I might have one or two other things that I was trying to touch on, but
Yeah.
oh, one quick thing on the this is important. On coming in from Elk Ranch Road, that makes sense for a whole lot of reasons. The capacity of the sewer that's over there, the water line. We could just do utilities there, but that's actually what sprung the garages onto us. It was like, well, why don't we just do some tuck-in garages, come right off of Elk Ranch Road and bury these 2 garages or 3 garages into the hillside, right where you really wouldn't see them. And crossing that, the floodplain there is quite small, quite narrow. I happen to have a little experience dealing with floodplains, and we could get a no rise certificate, I'm sure, with no issues. And I know what the wetlands are there, and we don't impact any wetlands. If we did, I wouldn't even have suggested the idea. So we would bridge over the existing wetlands, similar to what was originally conceived in Elk Creek before we piped it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had I mean, we spent a little bit of money on this drawing. It's graded, it's got water, sewer. This is kind of very close to a final civil engineering plan. I'm fine torching that if you guys have a better idea or you think there's something more appropriate. So yeah, I mean, I'm open to your ideas and what we want is we want something that's going to sell, obviously, and we want something that's going to at least complement and not, if not improve and enhance the 4 neighborhoods that are already there. That's my goal. That's my underlying goal. And were it not for that, I wouldn't have bought this property and would be probably down in the village or up the mountain or at Byers Peak Ranch doing something, guys. So, okay. Mr. Chair, do y'all have
Yeah.
any feedback for me or questions or comments?
Yeah. First, I'm glad we're talking about this now. Obviously, we don't want to waste your time or anybody else's, and so talking about it now is great. It opens the door so that we all know what's coming down the road and things get approved faster, hopefully. Also, I really like the underground parking idea. I know that's an added expense, but it's a huge benefit to the people that are eventually going to buy those condos. And it's a huge benefit for anybody driving by just because nobody wants to stare at parking lots all the time.
Yep.
So that's great. Also, the sewer capacity thing is a smart move. I think that's a great idea, and I don't mind another entrance off of Elk Ranch Road. So I think all those changes are really good. It doesn't seem like we're actually that far off. And with the elevation, couldn't you just dig a little deeper and make the garages a little more underground, and then you're closer to that 45 feet?
Well, I was going to ask Eric a question. You're not measuring the garages. You're not counting the garages in your calcs. What he's doing is, what you've got is, it's not just one slope, right? It's sloping multiple directions. So he's taking, like, if my hand were the example, he's taking the lowest point,
Mhm.
right? And then taking that grade back in, I think, is how he was drawing his red lines. So there's a couple of things you could do. You could nuke the whole site and stair step it, make it look like a ladder, right? And we can pick the low points on both sides of the hill and go straight across and basically make a flat bench and have 2 buildings at the top and step down and 2 buildings there and 2 buildings there. There's a famous road in San Francisco that kind of has a similar thing winding up through these homes. And we'd put a road in the middle. I mean, that's another option. And then with that, we want to have a secondary access. Obviously, this is not a very long property, so we would probably be close to the cul-de-sac length, but I still think it's wise to I'd like to have a road coming in off of Old Victory Road like what we have,
Mhm.
or Elk Ranch. Kind of could go either way. Old Victory's easier to cut in. Off of Meadow Trail, it's an easier road to bring in than the one off Elk Ranch Road. Um,
So on this, though, Elk Branch is only the access for A and B building.
I think it's A, B, and C, maybe. It's those three. No, I'm sorry. You're right. It only feeds those two. And that's, yep.
So what do I get out? That's just the one, okay, or to work that out eventually with the fire department.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea on that one, those are quite short roads. And then you've got the road up above, which also would provide parking, as well. Some of the surface parking relates to those. So I think the fire department would really like that, Katie, because there's access on both sides of the buildings, which you rarely get in this instance. Yeah. 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 But I think we have a similar format in the original plan. If we go back to the very original where we were kind of taking the Elk Creek condo buildings up, we had one of those where we had 7 buildings. It worked just fine. It gets us up to our density. I like the openness, and that's why I dropped it down to 6 and said, well, let's go taller, trying to get the height. I mean, guys, I think the core decision that the planning commission needs to make is, if we're married to heights, then I think we're making design decisions that create wider buildings, bigger footprints, right? Because we actually have more open space on all of our projects than we're required to have. And that's because we keep pretty compact footprints. So we can either go up or we can go out. I prefer going up and having more space between buildings. But if you guys as a planning commission think, hey, why not go out? We can design to that. I'm just looking for guidance at this point, and would like to make one last drawing of this and put our sets to go. Rather than, me keep throwing darts blindly here and hoping one of them sticks. So that's where I'm at. I mean, I'm listening. I'm all ears. You guys tell me.
Just wondering, Clark, if making the building footprints wider versus going up, you're gonna meet with less resistance generally to trying to get some sort of height variance.
We agree completely. 100%. I mean, I could basically have no variance request whatsoever and make these buildings wider, bigger, fatter, or add another building. I could add another building. And you're exactly right, Margaret. We don't it doesn't highlight it. It doesn't put you guys in a position of, but again, it's back to the core question of, we want good design, or do we just want people to jam stuff, is what I'm going to make the analogy of, jam stuff into the box that is the code that's here, because that's the box, right? I mean, frankly, from a financial perspective, I would be a lot better off to just to jam it in the box and say, guys, I don't, but I'm pretty passionate about the area, and I'm pretty passionate about what I build and our communities around it. And I want to protect them, and I want to be proud of what I built. So, I mean, I know a lot of guys around here that have jammed some stuff into boxes, and, I look at that and go, that's what we want Fraser to be? Really? I mean, that's been forced upon them by a lack of flexibility and lack of people sitting here with design eyes and saying, you know what, I don't think that's going to be good design. So I really think it comes down to, do we want to have high quality design and some flexibility? Because Garrett's just, I understand Garrett's just trying to do his job and saying, this is the box, fit it in the box, right? I get it. And I promise you, we can fit it in the box. But the 4 neighborhoods around it, right? But the 4 neighborhoods around it, Katie, might not like the box, right? So you can call me Clark, Katie.
Something worded edgewise, sir. For one,
Your mic's not on.
some of this I don't have.
Katie, mic.
I don't have as much of a problem with the height variance here because it's not right on Highway 40. It's not blocking that view corridor from people that come through of buyers. I don't think it takes that out at all. The buildings are huge, but you get the underground parking, which is great. And there's some nice space in between them, which is good. And because it's tucked in above your existing development, I don't have an issue with it. I think the only concern that jumps out at me, and this will be addressed later, is that, and I understand the need for a 13-foot retaining wall, but depending on how the height of the wall and then the height of the building from the top of the wall. And, it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. And I'm sure you'll have all sorts of safety things around it, so,
Around the wall.
yeah, safety
Yeah,
soles,
I personally don't like big tall walls like that. Like Rendezvous, we have a number of them.
yeah,
They don't have any safety things around them.
yeah,
They're bigger than that.
yeah. Maybe in,
They're
maybe in
challenging.
that one unit, you could put a little common recreation room type space that's ground level that could be sunk in. Also, just a thought, maybe below or above the parking garage to be able to drop it a little bit more.
Well,
Anyway,
I like to encourage people, Katie, to go use our rec center because it's right there. And it's
well,
good
there's a
for
lot of
business at the
competition
rec
there
center.
anymore these days.
I understand, but I mean, it's good for business there and
Oh,
it is a convenient
okay.
place.
Just
so.
a thought. So anyway, yeah, the retaining wall, will be interesting to see how that turns out and what that's gonna take. And I think it's a no-brainer that the road will between, that main road will connect on over to your Elk Creek condos, run through their road that goes service with the two parking areas for another exit. Because that just kind of dead ends on my map that I'm looking at, or the drawing. You know what I'm talking about? Yep,
I think
Pulling
so.
it up.
It connects to Spring
Yeah.
View Lane.
right there.
Yep.
So that'll connect on through.
Right.
Great.
Yeah, that's an existing easement. That was Mr. Summerall's access.
Mhm.
Right. I remember that.
Yeah, we designed around it.
I remember that. Yep.
We wish he would have moved. Anyway, it's worked out fine, but it's there. So and it's got a water line in it
Okay.
that was put in for his property.
Interesting. So if it was his access, does that
That was his
come along?
access.
Does that
It's a straight
require
shot.
access to this part of your development now that you bought it?
Well, we in that development, we
curious.
preserve that access for Mr. Summerall, who, so the access is still there.
Yeah.
And it's a recorded easement and yeah,
Okay.
he has the right to be in the town, has a water line through there. It's
Okay.
just
All right. Good.
very straight shot, but
Yeah.
that's something we worked around for a number of years. So I don't want to not, we had some designs where we didn't use that for a few reasons, but I kind of like what it does to utility connections and looping, which is preferred by the town on water systems in particular. And I liked what it did to the accessibility of the property with providing multiple accesses.
Mhm.
So I think it's important to keep it. But
So, Mr. Lipscomb, I like this plan. I think that we too get caught up in height. And I think that your explanation of how you got the bigger footprint by having the drive aisle makes a lot of sense. I think people could understand that and would value having an underground garage versus surface parking. I do think it's important to work with the topography, so I'm not a big fan of scraping the site and terracing it so that it does not look natural. I think you've done a good job with that. I think it's important that units have a reasonable heights, and if you could get, what are the ceiling heights in these?
tens.
I think that's great.
I
I
think
think
that's what the
that's really
market
saleable.
wants.
That's the market.
Yeah.
I think we could, get there, and maybe if you threw in a couple of units that might be affordable housing, that would probably make you a hero.
I don't know, Peggy, I've done a few things and Apparently I'm not a hero.
Well,
so.
you know, we keep trying to promote you to that level.
Yeah, you know,
Is that well put, Bob?
throwing in some deed restricted, a couple of deed restricted units would definitely validate, like I said, with Torrey Village, we went higher because of the public good. As was your approval initially for the 2 buildings over at the Mill Apartments. The county gave you the 45 feet versus 35 feet on those 2 buildings because of the public good.
No, that was the design issue. The county was, I was at the meeting.
I was at that
You-
commissioners meeting.
You were not at that commissioner meeting. I
when
was.
There was, anyway,
And
I won't
it
go
was-
there.
yeah,
That's not.
It
the
was
issue.
flat roof design,
Right.
because I still ended up with 9-foot ceilings. And we already had the deed restricted building with the same units. It was this design A or design B.
Okay.
And design B
Okay.
was a better design. Okay, it wasn't commissioners, by
Yeah,
the way,
and
it
I
was
do
planning
agree with that,
commission
but it
and
was-
board of adjustments.
Yeah.
And you were not there, I was, so. But thank you though for the input. But the housing and the deed restriction that we did do there had nothing whatsoever to do with the height variance. It was about getting a gabled sloped roof on those buildings in lieu of the flat roof design that was the original approved design. So,
And I think another thing that would really help with getting the height variance would be to have some good visuals for the neighbors to see what effect it would have on them. So when the neighbors come to us or come to the town, then we can say that, you know, this is what it's gonna look like. This is what it's gonna look like from your front deck, patio, your living room window, what, you know, what you're gonna see. So I think that
Well,
would really help.
yeah, Mr. Summerall, despite us working around that eyesore for a long time, it was quite the eyesore.
Oh, no.
So just about anything is an improvement.
Yeah, so, but that'll.
And so I think the neighbors appreciate the cleanup. And I think they recognize, most of them recognize my sensitivity to what we try to do here. But I appreciate that, Annie. I think if that's the direction we settle on, the next step is to go, do further architectural work and design a building exterior, before we, you know, and do kind of a 3D rendering and say, here's what it looked like. In that regard, I think the reference point that I use are the trees that are still there,
Yeah,
and they're taller than these buildings.
that would help people too with those trees there. So.
Yeah, so I mean, there were a lot more before, but there's still a lot of trees there.
Yeah.
And when, you know, most of these people bought, you couldn't see through what was a, you know, then standing forest, and they've slowly been falling down, and Steve was slowly cutting them up. And I have a mess, like a tangled mess of dead fallen trees that he couldn't cut up anymore because he got into a condition he couldn't do that. So,
And I would like to defend the box. I think that the proper approach, if the box is not correct, then let's change the box. That's I think the correct direction to go. I like to be flexible, but I think that puts all of us in a spot that has the town questioning what our motives are and why we're operating outside our regulations. Let's look at the regulations and take a reasoned approach to it. And these type of situations help us see how these things work. And Garrett's really good at this. I think you're looking at some code discussions for us coming up and for the town board coming up, and let's change the box if it's not right. So.
I was curious, the code that this piece of property is under, has that been in place longer than the 2003 annexation agreement?
yeah, this was, I'll tell you the history. This was annexed in 1998. It was the one piece of land surrounded by the 1986 development of
I'm more
Cousins
wondering
Meadow.
about the code though, like
Right,
when
but
was the code?
so the answer to the question was in the county, and the town wanted it annexed in the town. It's a 2-page annexation document, very simple. The town brought water to Steve's property. And the B zone district, the PD already existed, modified also in 1998. So there was 86 and then some amendments, and then a 1998, which is what we bought. And Mr. Summerall's rectangle is in the middle of what we bought in 1998. And he had just annexed it, actually. It was Jeff Johnston was the mayor. Andy would probably know, he was here. And they worked with Steve and got the property annexed. And part of Steve's deal was he wanted the ability to do business there. And that hence the B zone district zoning. that he obtained, which I think is unlimited commercial and 20 unit per acre residential. That again, I mean, does anybody think business of any sort makes sense here? I don't either. Good. We all agree on that. Yeah. I mean, I can remember Steve was talking about pot shops and Agati's at the time. No offense to those guys, but I'm like, that is not going to go over well with my neighbors and my homeowners here. That would be
Yeah.
really not good.
The one thing we talked about a long time ago, because it's up on the hill and you got a view, would be to have a restaurant with decks and a bar where people could look over and see the Beaver Buyers and back of the divide because you're elevated up on a hill. But I know that's not as
Will you
lucrative.
run the restaurant?
Right. Forget about
That's
it, but-
easier said than done.
Yeah, I know.
God bless our
But that was a
restaurateurs in this
thought.
town.
You know, it could be kind of a cool place. You've got all those residents there. They hang at the brewery, but
I
you know, like,
brewery's been
nah.
awesome.
Going back
But
to
you gotta
Minnesota, I'm
admit,
just
the
curious.
location would be pretty cool.
So to answer your
Yeah.
question, Brian, is the B zone district was around when the PDD was done. PDD was in the code, similar to what would be in some communities a PUD, right? Plan unit development, same structure. And the B zone district was one of the densities. In fact, it was the largest density. We rezoned Forest Meadow Solar Subdivision lot, several of them, to what are now Meyer Lot 1 and 2, which are B zone district. Okay, and we actually reduced the density on those by going to B zone district from what was previously approved as part of Forest Meadow Solar. So
I'm just the reason I ask is so then we went and did the 2003 annexation agreement and we did this Four Corners thing. And so like
the average.
was that the town kind of saying maybe this is a better way to look at these angled properties? I mean, that's kind of what I'm getting at there. Is
Well, it may have been because Rendezvous on the east side was, you're going up the side of a mountain.
right.
I think it's an excellent point. And I was involved in that too. Peggy is exactly right. I can remember we were sitting there with our team and I can't remember the first, well, I knew who the first time was. They didn't have this issue, but one of the problems we were running into on lots was you couldn't literally, if we did the height under the old regs, you couldn't get into the homes. Right? And I mean, cause you're building on 30% slopes. And you couldn't get driveways into the garages. You would have stairs down to your home. It was not a good design. And it was a lot of work. I remember a lot, but frankly, it was intended to simplify the life of the then planner. Because we were getting into all of these very same things that Garrett is talking about. Where was the lowest point of the grade? Where are we measuring from? It was awful. And it was like, guys, this is not conducive to topography. And the interesting thing about average Four Corners, frankly, if I were to change your code, I would just change it to average Four Corners. Guess what? It works in meadows. It works on flat ground. It works on steep slopes. It works everywhere. And it makes life a lot easier for who's designing it, for the applicants, and for your staff.
So let's look at the box again.
Yeah.
There you go.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I think that's a good point, Brian and Andy. So,
Okay.
Chairman, we have some people online that would like to speak if you.
Yeah, so I don't know, Clark, there anything more before we
no,
go to online comments?
I don't have anything else.
Okay,
Well, there's somebody in the audience, I guess.
let's start with the audience and then we'll go to the folks that are online. Thanks, Clark.
Thank you, guys.
Again, Parnell Quinn, Fraser. Based on tonight's discussion, Ptarmigan has 6 buildings that would be in violation of what you just went through. They would be 35 feet or taller in those areas, and 35 feet is the maximum height. To answer Andy's comment, home buyers look at the ground. They don't think about elevations of a topo map or anything like that. They look at the ground. They look at the trees. You point at a power pole and you say that's 45 feet. You look at another power pole, that's 35 feet. That's how they determine what's going to be in their way. In Clark's case, you look at the trees, the average tree over there is 70 to 80 feet tall. I know that because I helped Steve cut quite a few of them down. The current code, as you guys have noticed, encourages parking lots, surface parking lots, and encourages sprawl. One of the other options that was going to go on that property, and thanks to Clark spelling it out, we're going to be a bunch of barn dominiums. And those are garages, giant garages with living spaces inside of them. So they're not considered storage units. So they get around that issue of the business zone in Fraser. The Fraser code currently prohibits and discourages market rate workforce housing and encourages the sprawl of more properties spread out over more land, such as the 12 to 14 units per acre instead of really getting to that 20 units per acre. The town personnel and some of the members of the board have mentioned to developers on the meadow north of town, known as the Jones property, that they would consider properties to be 75 feet tall and as many as 6,000 units on the 554 acres. This has come from 2 different developers that have called me and asked me, is that possible? And I told them on that meadow, I would doubt it. And on, where should you build and where shouldn't you build? Andy Miller, the head of the commission here, he built units up in the National Forest, and they weren't deed restricted. They were built for profit. And I think they're great things and people get to use them, but they're still built for profit and they were still built in the National Forest. So to sit there, Andy, and tell people they shouldn't build on their private property, I find that really disingenuous of your position.
All right. So we were talking about a project here, but I'll talk with you later, Parnell. Thank you. So we have some comments from online.
Just gonna stay here in case somebody has a question for me. It's easier.
Yeah. Can I talk? This is Steve Watts.
Steve, we can hear you.
Great. Hi, Clark.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks. Hey, listen, a couple questions. First of all, I appreciate the fact that you are open for suggestions because I do have a couple. The first being aesthetics. When I first saw the plans, I was just aghast of how tall they were. And I went around and drove around, and I can't see any 4-story buildings like this that are residential, and especially in the middle of this 4 neighborhoods that you built, that's huge. So what I would like to see, and I'm sure that it might not be perfect, but I do really like the product at Elk Creek Condos. And I thought that's what would climb up the hill. And if they were 3 stories in the same layout, and yes, that would reduce some of the total occupancy and you wouldn't get your 20 units per acre, but I think that would fit very nicely into the neighborhood. The second item that I have is the access from Meadow Trail right into the complex. My fear would be that people, the 150 cars coming out of that new development, if they were going south on Old Victory, would go straight through on Meadow Trail and pick up Old Victory up by Dan and Pam's house, which would increase the traffic significantly on our quiet street of Meadow Trail. And also, I believe that particular spot is used as a snow storage area for the town of Fraser as they clear Meadow Trail from south to north. My suggestion would be if we could move that 1 building to the east, you still get access to the property. It might be even lower of a dig-in to get there, and it would make people coming out of the development either turn left or right and stay on that and then stay off the existing Meadow Trail Road. So those are 2 suggestions that I would have that would, I think, improve the acceptance, at least by me, of the development. I also appreciate the fact that you are developing it with homes instead of businesses. So that would be my input.
Thanks, Steve. Those are good comments, and I appreciate the pointed feedback. I think if we do those condos, it would end up needing to do one more building, 7 buildings, to make the economics work, because it's a very expensive site to develop. And I'm not opposed to looking at that, further. And then regarding Meadow Trail, we typically like, and it's a good land planning practice to line up roads. I hear you, but I mean, I personally, if I were pulling out of there and we're going on Old Victory Road, I'm going to turn right and go on Old Victory Road. I think about the drainage, right next to, Bob's house and that concrete pan, and it significantly slows people down. So, I think that would be a deterrent once people lived in there. But I'm certainly, I don't know, what does the planning commission think about roads lining up and roads not lining up?
I think lining up roads is a good idea, but that these pans and traffic calming measures that make it more attractive to take a more direct, better route for traffic is one way to deal with keeping the traffic down and still having the safety of this added access point. So
Yeah, I live right there by the pan. I must hear 5 to 10 scrapes every day. Fast. Kaboom! They don't do it too often,
Nope.
but yeah. So I think the first few times they bottomed out, they would either turn right or left on Old Victory.
Well, I expect the town would be open to if it became an issue to putting like a dead man speed bump type scenario, slightly in behind the trail or in front of the trail even, because it wouldn't affect Old Victory Road, so that people pulling in would realize, hey, I'm in a neighborhood, slow down, potentially, but.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this 4-way is gonna affect me a lot since I live right there, but I don't foresee anybody going from the condos through Meadow Trail and on instead of just taking Old Victory.
Yeah.
Old Victory is a straight shot, you know.
You could also put up a sign that says no through traffic.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think
it's longer.
actually,
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
the deterrent you have in place already, I don't see it being widely used by people coming out of the development, the condos. Not to say that there won't be some, but I hadn't really thought about that as being a serious issue, put it that way.
How do you guys feel about 7 smaller buildings versus 6
Can
larger
we go
buildings?
back to the first plan was that with 7?
That was with 4-story versions, which
Okay.
is exactly 49.5 to the midpoint of the roof with 10-foot floor plates. That plan is 6, 4 stories.
All right.
Maybe all of them may not be 4, Bob, but I think they might be, but regardless, that was a 4-story version of the Elk Creek condo.
Oh, okay. So those
Okay,
were
'cause-
gonna be 4 stories.
Yeah, because the Elk Creek condo's got elevators. And so, or it has an elevator, each one of those buildings, so it makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
So where would the 7th building go, just ballpark?
Boy, I don't know. I'd have to go sit down with our planners, and certainly wouldn't go on Old Victory, because that's, no, it probably would go on the side towards Old Victory, sorry, towards your neighborhood, Bob. Because the other side is Elk Creek, where there's 4,
Right.
and I don't see any space there, and the topography is pretty steep. It probably could possibly go up at the top. We might be able to reconfigure something up towards the top, more towards that, the highest point of the property, and the one kind of right next to that road now. Maybe, I don't know. I would sit down with my land planners and play around with some different concepts.
But if you did this concept with 7 buildings, those would be more, less stair step benched up the hill. It would look more benched and stair step than the current plan that we were looking at with 6 buildings.
a lot more parking, obviously, because there's no parking
Yeah,
in the
they-
buildings.
That's right. There's quite a bit more surface parking. Well, it's all surface park, because there's no parking under these buildings. And the issue with that is, and the reason those footprints got so big, is the drive aisle, right, under the buildings.
Yeah.
So I couldn't sit here and tell you right now, I would stick one right here. I think it's one of those things I gotta sit down and kind of do some drawings and mess around with grades but you're right, I think it would be more stair stepped. And then that central road. I also don't, on this one, I like connecting over, on where the old driveway was, but, yeah, this one has the connection down by the Elk Creek condos in a different location. Which frankly could just tie right into Old Victory Road there too, I think, but then you've got a road next to a road, that's weird.
You got,
Um,
the other one had 3 different exits.
at 3 access points, which is
Yeah,
kinda nice.
and you had a lot more landscaping and it wasn't all just surface.
Yeah.
front.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's what you gain with height. I mean, that's the thing. Guys, I was once, and I don't want to belabor the context, but, when I lived in Aspen for quite a while, they were studying housing and they had all these housing shortages, et cetera. And they hired this expert planner that was globally recognized in housing. And, I lived in downtown. Downtown was maxed out. There's no land. His solution was go higher. Okay. The guy they hired and they hated it. They're like, that's not acceptable. There's got to be something better. And we used to joke about we could do Mole City and go subterranean, right? But nobody wants to go up. But going up sometimes is maybe better than going out. So just food for thought for you guys. But and I'm not talking like we're not talking skyscrapers here, right? I mean, having a 4-level residential building is pretty practical and reasonable. I think Winter Park Lodge 2 is 4 level. Do you know, Andy, is that one 4 levels? It kind of stair steps, but I think it's 4 levels. Because it's going up the big hill behind. So I could be wrong, but anyway.
Okay.
But Steve, thank you for the comments.
Anything,
Welcome.
anybody else online?
If anybody else online would like to speak, can you please raise your hand?
Okay.
It's,
Alrighty, I
it's,
think a lot of good feedback
Yeah.
and Clark, I'm in general in favor of, if you're in town, let's have some density and let's keep this thing from sprawling and one of my huts is a nonprofit that Katie sits on the board and it is on forest. The other one's on private property, just to clarify. So.
Well, good discussion with everybody. And I think we talked about some meaningful things. So thank you for being collaborative and providing some real input. And I think we got a couple of directions to go study. Obviously we have the one that you guys have, and we'll talk with staff a little bit more about that and then evaluate some like the option that Steve just discussed
Mhm.
and see what that looks like. Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you
sir.
guys.
Yep.
Yeah, I sure appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anything further from the board? Thank you. Discuss dates for meetings in November, December.
Yeah, so just, never too early to look ahead. I mean, obviously with November and December, Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. And the 4th Wednesday of the month falls on the Wednesday prior to Thanksgiving and then Christmas Day itself. I think generally the December meeting is generally just canceled outright. I'm not opposed to doing that again this year. But I just wanted to have a discussion, have everyone look at their calendars. I am anticipating being out of the state the week of Thanksgiving. We could certainly hold it the Wednesday prior. I would have to run it virtually. But I just wanted to see if there was any potential to shift that Wednesday date either to the 2nd Wednesday in November or
That's town board.
the 2nd Wednesday, though, the
No, you're
13th.
Right, second's open, you got it.
So either the 13th of November or a Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday the week before Thanksgiving. I know that would be a town board meeting week, but
Wednesday, the 13th works for
I
me.
think the 13th was great.
Yeah, works for
Okay.
me too.
Okay,
I'm gonna be gone from the 7th to the 21st, and I'm gonna be overseas in Bangkok
Oh, good
and
for you.
Cambodia, so I don't think I'll be zooming in.
fine.
So you're talking November 13th.
Yeah,
Correct.
I could do that.
Okay.
let's just do that one.
Is there any desire to hold a meeting, say December 11th, pending any
Now we've got the town party that month too.
Oh,
and I think
sure.
Let's just take
Mhm.
December off.
Okay.
Sound all right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some thumbs up from Antoinette.
Yeah.
Okay.
Gotcha. So November meeting on the 13th and canceling the December meeting.
Yeah, sounds good.
Great.
Okay, so the comprehensive plan update website and first survey.
Yeah, so just, I just wanted to push this out for you all, just for the broader public. Trying to push it out in as many places as possible. The consultants working on the comprehensive plan have put together a website for the project. There's not a lot on that website right now, but as they work through their planning process and, create maps and analysis and reports, that website is where that stuff will be uploaded and live, as we go through the planning process. And I just also wanted to advertise a survey. Please push that out in your own networks. The more responses to that survey that we get, the better.
Is that up this weekend? Because I just sent it to everybody in my office. It's kind of sounded like, September 1, we're done.
No, it's going to stay open for about 2 more weeks,
Okay.
at least. We have had a fairly good response thus far. We had a meeting with the consultant this morning. We've had 124 responses so far. Would love to, would love to bump that up even higher. But so far, so good. I do also just want to note, I had some folks reach out to me, Andy being one of them, about last week's picnic in the park on the 20th. The consultants were here in town. They were at the picnic in the park. And we really didn't push that out through social media or other notifications more broadly to let folks know that the consultants would be here. Really, yes, they were here having conversations with folks and answering questions and, having discussion, as is always great to do in person. But really the intent of that was just to push people to the survey. But again, I do just want to recognize and say that our kind of advertising for them being up here and that opportunity for folks to meet with those consultants was not advertised to a degree that it should have been. There certainly will be future opportunities as the planning process progresses, where the consultants will be here and hold, open houses and other public engagement sessions. And we'll certainly make sure that that's pushed out more broadly. So any other questions or comments about the comprehensive plan right now?
What's the timing of this?
So we're looking to have the plan completely finished and adopted late summer of next year.
Okay.
The consultants will be giving their first kind of presentation to the board and planning commission. We're targeting October. That way, the survey will close next month in September. That gives them time to analyze the results and report on the, feedback that we received in this first survey and talk about the next steps in the process. So
How long's that survey been up? I didn't know about it. Like, how are you promoting it?
A couple weeks.
it's been live on our website for at least a couple weeks. I can check the exact date.
You're right, Clark goes, well, I didn't know about it either.
Yeah.
So,
It pops right up to the front.
Yeah.
If you open the website,
yeah.
Okay.
go to the town website, it's right there.
And I think we should
Okay,
aim
which is
at
great.
at an open house type presentation, and we've had those before here in this room, and they've been like
Either
for the
here or
highway
the
project
church of
or-
what's happening now.
Yeah, but try and get maybe 1 or 2 different times in this winter when people can really get down into the details of it and provide input as a community. So
Yeah, absolutely. So our next kind of a larger open house public engagement type of session, we're targeting January, February of next year. Once they have some actual things to present on
Yeah,
and get
perfect.
input on from the public. So
Question on that, is the firm that you hired using the existing comp plan as kind of the base level, and are they going in and redlining that? Like, who's directing what they're doing and what their directive is? Like, are you doing it, Garrett, or who's in charge of telling this, here's what we want for the town?
yeah, so I guess to the first point, they have reviewed the previous comprehensive plan as well as probably close to a dozen, if not more, previously adopted historical plans to kind of evaluate what those plans were at the time they were adopted. Maybe not necessarily a line by line red line of them, but to kind of document those prior planning efforts has certainly already been done. And as far as the, scope that they're doing, they do have a fairly detailed scope of work as part of their contract with the town. And they are primarily being overseen by myself in addition to other town staff. Certainly Michael, Sarah Tanzarite, Paul Johnson. We hold bi-weekly meetings with the consultant to make sure we're on track and keeping the scope.
Is that scope of work available anywhere?
It should have been part of the packet of the board meeting when their contract was approved.
Okay.
And I can forward that around to all the commissioners if they'd like to see that again.
Be helpful.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions on the comp plan?
And the Downtown Development Authority?
Yeah, so I just have a very brief presentation here. I just wanted to talk through, just so everyone on the Planning Commission is aware that you all have an important and exciting role as it relates to our Downtown Development Authority and the plan of development that needs to be created for the DDA.
Give Bob just a quick minute.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Let's give Bob that.
Just let you all digest the text here on the screen.
Not to put him on the spot. We want him to
Perfect.
be there.
So the county assessor ends up the deadline for the plan, eh?
Yeah, and that's based on, again, the point of the DDA is the whole tax
Yeah.
increment
Oh,
financing, and they need to have this plan adopted to start the clock, quote
Correct.
unquote,
All right.
on,
And the assessor did come and do a presentation for the DDA board.
Okay.
And of course, the numbers could change. But right now, it looks like the increment would be 65,000 for our first year. And that 65 carries over and changes in value over time also. But, so that's significant. And again, that's one of the big reasons we're having to push to get this plan approved. And let's wait for Bob.
Before the appraisal year, yeah.
yeah, so that $65,000 increment, not just for this year, but for the 30-year life of the
Yeah.
DDA,
Yeah.
which represents nearly $2 million.
We
Yeah.
were just talking about the relation with the assessor, Bob, the DDA. And the need for this November 15th deadline to anyway, Katie's more familiar.
Yes,
Yes.
so I made them wait for you. Let you know about this date coming up, but talk about the dates and then
Sure.
we'll talk about why we have it.
Yeah, so essentially the dates up here. So the DDA, the Downtown Development Authority, is working with planning consultant, AIRS is their name, on a really targeted community engagement and workshop session happening September 9th, 10th, and 11th.
3 days.
All 3 days are going to be up here those 3 days, meeting with town staff, stakeholders, local business owners, etc. And the purpose of them being up here is not just to meet with folks in the community, but to draft this plan of development over the course of those 3 days in a really fast process, essentially. So by the 11th, essentially, they will have a draft plan of development more or less in hand that can be reviewed by all these, the DDA board, the planning commission, et cetera, et cetera. So, but speaking to kind of the approval process that has to happen, first, the DDA board has to approve that plan before it advances to the planning commission. So they are looking to do so on one of those 3 September dates, 13th, 16th, or 17th. And then that plan of development will be published in the packet for the planning commission meeting. We will review and provide feedback and ultimately recommend approval of that plan of development during our September meeting next month. And then the Board of Trustees will hold a public hearing in October, likely the second meeting in October, I think, to approve the plan of development. And ultimately, what we're working for towards is that November 15th deadline with the county assessor.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, Bob. And so the county assessor spoke with us, or at least a woman that works with the assessor's office. And she was saying that it could change depending on what happens at the state level and this and that. But at where things are right now, that increment for this first year would be $65,000. And that would carry over every year for 30 years. Significant amount of money. And then the plan itself, you're probably all aware of this, it's very high level, super high level, and just kind of all encompassing for what we'd love to see in that development district, and leaving it open enough so it would for changes in transportation, new technology, whatever, you name it, that it could be included later. So it's a very high level. It's not targeting necessarily specific projects.
yeah, so I think the other key thing just to mention is that second week in September, the 9th through the 11th dates. Obviously we want some members of the planning commission to be involved in those workshops and processes. In speaking with Sarah, I don't think, frankly, all 7 of you could be, just to limit the number of people in some of these sessions, but the consultant is also scheduling one-on-one meetings with folks as they would like to. So I will send around, Sarah created a link to kind of set up your availability, but kind of the larger kind of opening and closing sessions, if you will, for those that are happening on the morning of the 9th and the 11th. I think we'd like to limit that to like 4 planning commissioners is what Sarah told me. Okay.
So
Yeah. So I think certainly Commissioner Souls, you're obviously going to be involved through your involvement on the DDA board, but if any folks are particularly passionate about attending those workshops and meeting with the consultant, you're welcome to do so. But again, just also recognize that in our September meeting, all 7 commissioners will have a chance to review the plan and provide input before it goes to the board. So don't need to make any decisions or anything today. Just wanted to get that in front of everyone. So.
Any other questions on the DDA? So future agenda items.
Andy, before we get to that, can I
Yeah.
just make a quick statement?
Sure.
Thank you. I just wanted to rectify a comment that I made at the last planning commission meeting regarding the land dedication for the recreation center for the 2003 annexation agreement. I was incorrect about that statement, and that I made at that last meeting, which was on July 24th, which was the dedication of the 5 acres to the Fraser Valley Metropolitan Recreation District. And while the 2003 annexation agreement required the 5-acre dedication to the rec district for the purpose of a community recreation facility, it was contingent on voter approval for the district bonds to finance the community recreation center, which failed in 2004 and it failed in 2006, but it was finally passed in 2007. Per the 2003 Rendezvous annexation agreement, the failed rec district ballot initiative 2004 triggered a 5-acre dedication to the town of Fraser for a public purpose. With this 5-acre district ballot initiative, the failed rec district ballot initiative 2004 triggered the 5-acre dedication to the town of Fraser for a public purpose. With this 5-acre dedication requirement to the town,
the developer was no longer bound to the 5-acre dedication for the recreation facility. Following the failed 2004 Rec District ballot initiative, Grand Park maintained interest in dedicating the 5 acres to the Grand Park Community Rec Center. Since the town of Fraser was very supportive of the land dedication for a community recreation center, to help facilitate the land dedication, the town approved a resolution 2008 that provided two things: that the square footage of the recreation center is not attributable to or count towards the total commercial square footage allowable within the Grand Park PDD. And the second thing is that the acreage and an amount equal to the total site acreage provided to the Fraser Valley Recreation District may be reallocated within Grand Park PDD, within planning area 1WA, and or any planning area west of the railroad tracks. So I just want to set that straight and just want to apologize for the misunderstanding.
Thank you for the correction, Michael.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Some digging.
Any other agenda items? I would like to discuss speed again. Did you get my, texted you a picture, but it was pretty late
Oh.
today, so no worries.
Okay.
Oh, just some kind of speed zone in Old Town here, that would recognize the fact that we share streets with pedestrians. And the picture I sent you, maybe you can send that when you get a chance to around to the group, but it's just a simple sign that has a picture of a car and a pedestrian right next to each other and says shared streets. And just, I think we're just getting more aggressive drivers. If you drive around town, it's amazing how many slow signs that people have put out, the little figures and things. It's getting pretty scary walking around town. And just coming to the meeting tonight, a green Toyota pickup truck driven by somebody here in the room kind of took me around the right-hand corner, which I was going to take, I guess, but I was forced to at that point. But anyway, Parnell, it's just, you passed me on the railroad tracks with another car there. I was trying to hold some lanes so I didn't go off the edge of those abutments. But anyway, we all do it, and I think we would all quit doing it if we would all have a better chance to quit doing it if we just slowed down a little bit.
Yeah.
And 15 instead of 20 seems inconsequential, but it tends to be 5 over, everybody does anyway. So it seems to be 25 instead of 20. And that's just too dang fast. And it's interesting that, I don't know if you guys ride the bike trail, the paved bike trail up through the Adderall campground. Originally, Winter Park posted that as a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit for bikes, and they've lowered it to 10. Because the main reason they did that was because of all the rental electric bikes on that trail from the ski area. But 15 miles an hour on a bicycle is pretty fast. And it also invites people passing bikes and passing pedestrians without a clear lane to do it. So I'd really like we could take a close look at having some speed zones in town that lower this limit down to 15.
I
So-
agree, in Old Town
Yeah,
and the access
basically
from,
anywhere where there's
you
no
know,
sidewalk.
we got lots of students now coming in from the condos there at Mill, and it's awesome, but we weren't able to get the sidewalk in this year. That's going on hold till next year.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's tight.
yeah.
It's tight. I think 15 would be good.
Said condos, I was like.
Oh, condos,
Yeah,
apartments. I'm sorry.
Apartments, yes.
It's late.
Did I miss?
I'm old. It's late. Mill
So-
apartments.
So
Yeah.
Garrett, let's make a note to talk to Brad and Paul
Paul about this.
and see. I know that Brian's had preliminary discussions with CDOT as well about this, and they seem to be good with it. We need to find out what type of signage is allowed per the CDOT standards that's reflective of what you're looking for, Andy.
Right.
And let's just try to get the request rolling.
Yeah.
Because that would be
Make
30
a note
on,
to talk to Brad and Paul about this
Mhm.
and have them research what the CDOT standards are for that signage.
and that'd be 30 on 40 instead of 35 would be one of the discussions with
And for the
with
speed,
CDOT. So, yeah.
right? So for the speed and for the signage of share the road kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Mhm.
That was a picture I sent you from Australia, but yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just gonna have to meet the CDOT requirements because they have very specific signage they allow. And
Do we have to meet CDOT requirements on town streets or?
with Highway 40,
Yeah,
you do.
well, 40 is, I'm looking at the speed limit on any place where we don't have sidewalks. Where we know that pedestrians and bicyclists have to be on the street. And so that basically is Old Town, beneath it. That would be how we delineate it. So,
Okay, so you're
And
specifically
Ptarmigan.
talking about off Highway 40.
All
Yeah.
of Ptarmigan.
Okay.
Rendezvous, yeah.
yeah, a lot of Rendezvous has no sidewalk, so. Parnell,
Parnell Quinn, Town of Fraser. If you look at your car radar, if you have a newer car, the speed limit coming into town, where the 40 mile an hour speed limit, when you're going, north to south, it says it's 35, and when you get into town, it says it's 25 miles an hour. So CDOT has recognized that it should be 35 and 25, even though our signs still say 40 and 35 coming through town. And if on an average night, since I live there on the highway, people are coming through the town 55, 60 miles an hour easy.
yeah,
They speed up as soon as they get past the Birdie Lounge and Fisher's Bar.
Yeah.
So something to consider.
I did just send an email to CDOT because I keep forgetting to do it. So
yeah, no worries.
so we'll see what they come back with.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey.